Hello everybody, hope you're all well. I'm currently on my holidays at the moment, but that doesn't mean you don't get a protection update from me. Connected to this week's protection update is not one, but two brand new Protection Insight podcasts. And one of these is something I wanted to do for quite some time. If you joined me at any of the recent Trust Made Simple workshops over the past few weeks, you'll remember the last part of that workshop is where we looked at the letter of wishes. For me, this is one of the biggest tricks our industry misses, even when we do write protection policies into trust. The podcast is simply called Writing a Letter of Wishes, and you don't need to press anything, it will play in just a second. It's completely generic and it will work alongside any protection policy that you write into any discretionary trust with any provider. That can be online or it can be a paper deed, it doesn't matter, it's appropriate for both. Just take a look at the podcast, I think it speaks for itself. So that's it from me. I'll be back next week with a fuller protection update, but in the meantime, here is the Writing a Letter of Wishes Protection Insight podcast. Hello everybody, just me on this Protection Insight podcast today, but we're going to take a closer look at the letter, or as you might call it, the expression of wishes that can be used alongside a trust. Now we're going to look at what it's used for, how to set one up, and how to make amendments in the future if you need to. Now, we know that there is a huge gap in our industry when it comes to the amount of life insurance policies that are actually written into trust. If you look at Swiss Re's Health and Term Watch, published in May 2021, they stated that 14% of level term policies taken out the previous year were written into trust, based on the providers that shared the data. So clearly, there's quite a bit of work to do in terms of writing more policies into trust. But we're not really going to focus on the trust completion process in this podcast. We've got a whole series of Protection Insight podcasts which cover that process from all the main providers. For me, a letter of wishes is very often a missing component, and it's not even considered for many policies which are actually written into trust. What you're going to see here is really just how important that process really is. And if you do build this into your process, it really will help demonstrate your professionalism, your expertise as an advisor, plus the client also will really understand exactly what this whole piece of advice was all about. So let's get started with a very simple question. If you write a life insurance policy into trust and you indicate a default beneficiary on a discretionary trust, who will the life company pay the proceeds to in the event of a claim? Well, the answer is it won't be the default beneficiary. They'll actually pay the claim proceeds to the owners of the policy. That's the trustees. It's the trustees' job to pay the proceeds on to the intended beneficiaries. Why? Because you've used a discretionary trust. Discretion refers to the choice that trustees have, the choice to pay the proceeds to the person or persons that they feel is appropriate. Do they have unlimited choice? No, they don't. There's usually a list of discretionary beneficiaries mentioned on the trust form. Some providers call this section possible or potential beneficiaries, but it's quite consistent on most discretionary trusts that you use for protection policies. Typically, it's close family members. And these beneficiaries are what I would call the candidates. They're the people who can receive the policy proceeds. The trustees can pick from this list. But in actual fact, the trustees can actually award benefit to anybody who's been named to them in writing by the settlor. The only person who can't benefit is the settlor, but anyone else can. Now, the details of this specific person or persons can either be captured on the trust form or in a letter of wishes. Now, for this podcast today, we're going to stick with our case study example, which is John, who has a life insurance policy with a sum assured of £250,000. He has an unmarried partner who is Janet, and he wants the proceeds to go to her in the first instance. Now, I've deliberately picked an unmarried couple for this case study because I don't think you'll ever find an unmarried, or what you might call common law partner, on any list of discretionary beneficiaries. That means the trustees don't have the power to award payment to that person unless they've been notified in writing by the settlor. Again, either on the trust form or in a letter of wishes. So this is a particularly good example of where a letter of wishes fits really well. Now, after that, John has indicated that he wants the proceeds to go to his children in equal shares. So Janet first, then the children. Now, as simple as that instruction is, it simply isn't possible to articulate that level of detail to the trustees on any trust that you use for protection policies. You might be able to write Janet's name down on the trust form, but what about that second instruction to pay the proceeds to the children? Well, that's precisely why we should be setting up a letter of wishes. So to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do to start with is open up Microsoft Word. This is going to be a simple letter composed on Word, and I'm going to address this letter to each of the trustees. So in this example, that's Janet, Brian, and Mary. Now, each trustee needs to have a copy of this letter because it's going to tell them what they need to do should the time come. Until there is a claim, they don't have anything to do, so they just need to keep this letter in a safe place. Now, what I've seen in the past by some advisors is that this letter, once put into an envelope, they write the text on the back that says, to be opened in the event of John Smith's death. Well, I think that's quite a good idea personally, because A, the trustees don't really need to see what it says now, but B, a statement like that really does show how important and serious this whole thing is. But it is optional, you don't have to do it, just an idea. So back to the letter. This letter is written by the settler, who in our case study is John, and he's the life assured, he's the person who's creating the trust and this letter. So I'll add his full name and address here. We're going to date the letter, and it's very important that you do that. Make sure you date the letter, and I'll explain why in just a second. Then, I think it's a good idea to add a title description to what this letter of wishes is actually referring to. So I'll enter letter of wishes, John Smith, discretionary trust, Aviva, policy number, 4th of August 2021. I think a title like that makes it really clear about exactly what this letter of wishes is referring to, because we've got the policy number, we've got the date that the trust was created, the 4th of August, we've got John Smith, the settler, and we've got the life company, which is Aviva. Just keep it simple and obviously keep it clear. What next? Well, this is a letter, so I'm going to address this to the first of those trustees, which in this example is Brian. So, dear Brian, this letter explains my wishes with regard to the actions I'd like you and your fellow trustees to take with regards to my life insurance policy in the event of my death. Each trustee has a copy of this letter. So what we're saying here is this letter is going to tell them what to do, who to pay the proceeds to. It's also saying that the other trustees, Janet and Mary, also have a copy of this letter. Now we get to that first instruction. First priority is that my partner Janet Brown is looked after. Therefore, it's my wish that 100% of the proceeds of this life insurance policy should go to her if she survives me. So, if he dies before her, pay all the proceeds to Janet. And remember, one of these trustees is actually Janet. And the next instruction, my second priority is that the proceeds of this life insurance policy should then go to my children and be split equally between them. So if she dies before him, the instruction is to pay all the proceeds to the children and split it equally. Now that really is as simple as it needs to be. Your question as the advisor should always be, is it clear? Will the trustees be able to understand what the settler wants them to do? For me, I'd say that's pretty clear. So all John needs to do now is sign and date the letter. That's really important. It must be signed and it must be dated. Why? If it's not signed, there's no way of knowing that this letter wasn't created by somebody else. And the date, well, the great thing about the letter of wishes is that this can be amended as many times as you need to. So I'm going to add this extra line as a footnote, which reads, please note, as my wishes may change from time to time, please ignore the instructions in any other letter of wishes dated before this letter. So there could be a situation where John needs to do an update to his letter in the future. So let's just say in a few years' time, he splits up from Janet. It was quite acrimonious, and he now wants to make sure that she doesn't get any of the proceeds from this policy. All we do is create a new letter of wishes, and we make sure all the trustees have a copy of the updated version. So let's fast forward to, say, 3 years' time, 2024, 3 years from recording this podcast. John and Janet have now split up. This new letter is addressed to the first additional trustee, who is Brian. Mary will also get one of these updated letters. The date is the 1st of June 2024. It's a letter from John. John's the settler. And again, we'll use that same title for the letter. Dear Brian, this letter explains my wishes with regard to the actions I'd like you and your fellow trustees to take with regard to my life insurance policy in the event of my death. Each trustee has a copy of this letter. Now remember, Janet was one of those trustees, but what John has also done is remove Janet as an additional trustee. He does have that control during his lifetime. My first priority is that the proceeds of this life assurance policy should go to my children and be split equally between them. Yours sincerely, John Smith, 1st of June 2024. And again, we've got that same footnote that says, please note, as my wishes may change from time to time, please ignore the instructions in any other letter of wishes dated before this one. So they can now ignore that first letter and just focus on this one. Obviously, just make sure that each trustee has a copy of the updated letter. it's a good idea for you as the advisor to review this from time to time with your client. If it's good, then that's fine, leave it as it is. But if an update does need to be made, you can obviously help facilitate that. But do the trustees have to do what this letter says? No, it's not legally binding. And that's because if they have a good reason to ignore what this says and do something different, they can. They've got discretion. This is a discretionary trust after all, and it does give them that choice, that discretion to act. But if you pick people that you trust and you provide them with the instruction about what you want them to do when the time comes, you've got the best chance of them carrying out your wishes. So I hope that all made sense. But of course, if you do want to talk any of this through with me, please don't hesitate. Just give me a call. So that's it for this podcast. I hope you found it useful. Until next time, it's bye for now.